Brand new.
The Odd Ones Out is a 26-year-old storytime animator on YouTube who started all the way back on August 30th, 2014. Just kidding, I was gonna do like a whole introduction to good old James here, but everyone knows this guy. 18 million subscribers, his most popular YouTube video having 160 million views. His second most popular YouTube video having 105 million views, and overall just being a very popular and recognizable content creator. And out of nowhere, recently released a Netflix series called Oddballs, and I definitely have very important thoughts I want to share about the show, and I'm definitely not making this review just because it's a relevant topic. But anyway, the show was released on October 7th, 2022, and follows around James and his best friend Max, a lab-experimented anthropomorphic crocodile in the town called Dirt, where the two end up getting into some wacky mischief, usually causing it a result of complete disaster. The two also go to school and meet other friends like Echo, who is supposedly a time traveler, and some other people along the way. The show is very basic in formula, but of course it's the execution that matters. The cartoon slice-of-life episodes range from James and Max trying to figure out what's the best way to raise a baby, to James finding out his grandma's a robot gift service that his parents signed him up for. Speaking of which, what's up with Netflix and this whole two main characters need to raise a baby conflict? But anyway, some episodes were pretty creative, some weren't. So instead of just going through and talking about every episode, I'm just gonna talk about things like the characters, the jokes, the animation, etc. So I guess let's talk about some of the main characters, and I'll start with James, the self-inserted star of the show.
It was a good plan! I knew that Roxanne knew that I knew that paper covers rock. So I was expecting her to trick me by playing paper, which covers rock, which is why I chose scissors, which cuts paper. You don't understand, because I'm playing four-dimensional chess.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, she was playing rock, paper, scissors.
James is a bubble-shaped teenage boy who often than not likes getting into insane hijinks and occasional rants. When I went into the show, I was quite skeptical about 1, was James, the actual person, actually a good voice actor? And 2, was his character going to be some kind of Mary Sue or something along those lines? But surprisingly enough, the answer to those two questions are actually quite positive. James Rallison's voice acting is completely fine, which kind of makes sense considering he's been putting a voice on a character for years now. And unlike other definitely not professional voice actors, he actually knows how to scream. And when it comes to James just self-inserting himself as the main character, I wouldn't say that he's badly written. He's just a little rambunctious bubble boy who's very adamant about certain things, similar to the real James. So yeah, overall, just like everything else in this show, James's character is actually a lot better than I expected. But let's move James out of the way here and talk about a much more interesting character.
And tell your parents. They didn't tell me anything about you, which is why you got the default gift, hoop and stick.
Hoop and stick!
As I said before, Max is a human-like crocodile who is indeed a failed genetic experiment whose parents see him as a mistake and runs most likely very painful tests on a day-to-day basis. Which sounds like I'm trying to make it darker than it actually is, but this show makes it abundantly clear that this is all factual.
Oh, heck yeah! And I slept like a failed genetic experiment gifted with human intelligence and voice.
Well, that's an oddly specific metaphor, considering that's exactly what you are. You obviously have no idea how to parent. Before a child can succeed, you need to make them believe they can.
No, that's all wrong! First you stare at them when they're asleep and awake. You just always stare at them. Then you put them through rigorous and often painful tests. And most importantly, you only call them by their experiment number to prevent any emotional attachment.
Also, I think the episode of the clips you just watched is overall really cool when it comes to what they did with Max. Because pretty much the episode is about James and Max taking care of this toaster baby, and then the two end up fighting and making the toaster not so happy because James and Max can't agree on how they're supposed to raise a baby. Because unlike James, Max thinks doing painful experiments and being completely unloving is what every dad does because of his experience with his dad, which I think is just a really funny and neat bit that the episode had. Oh yeah, also at the end of the episode, Max starts bleeding out after a piece of burnt toast puts a hole into his chest. I thought that was pretty cool. But finally, moving all of the daddy issue stuff out of the way, Max is an energetic and dim-witted crocodile who often acts like a literal wild animal. Like whenever Max is angry or stressed in some ways, design becomes really realistic and detailed, and then sometimes he just proceeds to roll and freak out on the floor, which I think is just another neat bit that continues for the entire season. So in conclusion of Max's character, I am embarrassed how much I like him. Like, he's the comic relief character that feels like a lot of people would call him cringe, but I think it's really the delivery of some of the character's lines and his voice actor that really nailed it here. Echo is a time-traveling teenager who comes from the future. She also eats a lot because in the future processed foods went extinct, and so I guess she just went back to the past just so she can, like, eat ribs or something. Surprisingly for a time traveler, I don't actually have much to say about Echo. I guess a weird thing about the relationship with James and Max is that they actually only meet for the first time in the 4th episode, and James and Echo didn't really like each other. But then for some reason in episode 5, Echo is just hanging out with them, being friends with one another. Though it's pretty easy to say it, the only reason this occurs is just because they needed another main character to make a bunch of simple time travel and food jokes, a lot of which being inconsistent. For example, in episode 5, James, who's like possessed or whatever, throws a milkshake at Echo, but she manages to use this shield thing before James even picked up the cup, like as if she knew it was gonna happen, which doesn't make sense considering how that implies that she's lived through the events of episode 4 and 5 already. So wait a minute, an interdimensional being who is often very inconsistent? Well, that sounds familiar. There's also a plentiful amount of side characters in this show, most of which being quite forgettable and painfully stereotypical. Like for instance, Stuart, who's just like the school bully, but they do play around with the fact that he's a giant blob sometimes, and he pretty much has a whole episode proving he can possess people, which I definitely think makes him more interesting. But then there's characters like Maz who, well, actually, I can just put a clip here and you can easily tell what this character's only defining trait is.
I'm calling security. Roxanne, this printer's committing ice cream fraud.
There's also Mr. McFly, who's like a teacher, and that's kind of it. And then there's hold on, there's this one kid who's like the antagonist for like 2 episodes. James has parents, if you didn't know that. And I think there's oh yeah, there's this kind of like door-to-door salesman guy from episode 11. I think he's pretty cool, I guess. And yeah, I think that's it for the characters. I don't know how to segue yet, so
I was never taught what laws there are. I was never taught what laws there are. Let me repeat, I was not taught the law.
when it comes to the animation, it's pretty good, I guess. I mean, I don't know exactly how you review animation unless it's either godly or extremely awful. There are some janks I've seen with the animation some episodes though, like this part in episode 3 where they animated James like how you'd rig a VTuber model. Besides that, there's some smooth transitions here and there, as well as horrific background characters that they toss in. And the way some scenes in this show are choreographed definitely catches you off guard, like the one you're seeing right now, except without the moaning sounds. Also, there's probably some visual gags I could talk about here, but I think I'd rather save those for the next part of this video. But segue. The jokes in Oddballs are pretty hit or miss. Like, there's some creative and silly jokes like Max's dad dilemma in episode 1, but then there's jokes like this.
Hey, James, here's your bill. Also, wanna win a free fly fishing trip? Here's a flyer. Your outfit's pretty fly. Did you know your fly is down?
Now, sometimes just like the animations, the show will just hit you with something that catches you off guard.
Now, phase 2. Unlivable host.
Which hot sauce do you want to start with? A dogger burner or red tube fried?
Oh, hilarious names, but no, I'm not into that.
Oh yeah, and then there's also this.
Only half of me is offended.
That's how bad it is, Max. I had to use your species against you to make my point.
So yeah, when it comes to jokes, the show definitely can get creative. But before I get into my conclusion about the show as a whole, I have one thing to say to writers making jokes for animated kid shows. Stop making Fight Club references. No 9-year-old knows what Fight Club is. There's no point. So in conclusion, I went to this show expecting it to be horrible and ended up getting a bit surprised by the amount of creativity and actual thought put into this show. It's obviously not much, but it's definitely a neat show to watch when you're bored or looking for something simple to enjoy. And it has its appeal with some pretty good potential for a season 2, so no, I don't think James Rallison sold out, and no, I don't think this show was a catch grab. Personally, I'd recommend it to someone who just wants a nice kid show, similar to something like Bluey. And yeah, I think that's it. So thanks for 50 subs. Subscribe, Max is canonically autistic, and bye.